Recently, I've been getting more Hollow Knight content after the entire Chocolate Cake Silksong incident, and a couple of the videos I got were talking about if Hollow Knight was a Souls-like. Now up until then, I had never actually put a lot of thought into if Hollow Knight seriously fell into the Souls-like genre. In fact, up until then, I hadn't actually really thought of what Souls-like even means. One definition I found was on Wikipedia, which was similar to a lot of the other definitions I was finding. Says a Souls-like game is a subgenre of action role-playing games known for high difficulty level and emphasis on environmental storytelling. Now, if we were to take this definition strictly, since Hollow Knight doesn't have the role-playing aspects that Souls games do, it wouldn't be a Souls-like, despite having the highly focused environmental storytelling and the high difficulty. So despite Hollow Knight having similarities, it just wouldn't count. And this definition at first glance does seem to be completely correct, since if you were to compare it to a game in the series like Dark Souls for example, you'd see the environmental storytelling, a high difficulty, role-playing aspects, and an action game. But I actually disagree with this definition if we're taking it strictly purely because Sekiro Shadows Die Twice exists. There's no build variety or role-playing aspects in that game compared to something like Elden Ring, and it has way less environmental storytelling with more of a coherent and less lore-based story. Yet it's not just a Souls-like, but an actual Soulsborne game. This means that if you were to argue that Hollow Knight isn't a Souls-like, you'd first have to explain to me how that logic follows, and if by that definition, Sekiro isn't a Souls-like either. Or you'd have to argue that just any game FromSoft makes, as long as it's hard, is a Souls game. But that would mean that Armored Core 6 is a Souls game, which is not something people agree on at all. Then maybe if that argument fails, you'd have to argue that any game that FromSoft makes that's hard, that they brand as a Souls-like, is automatically a Souls-like, but that would just prove that the term is actually almost completely subjective and useless. Not only that, but games are allowed to be similar yet different in their own regard to Souls games and still be considered a Souls-like, because the word Souls-like should just mean that a game is similar to a Souls game, not identical. The only actual issue is that by this logic, games could very well unintentionally be a Souls-like, leaving the genre to be less created and more of just discovered or covered more by FromSoft. But that's not actually that big of a problem. A lot of people, maybe rightfully so, could easily just say that it'd be better if the Souls-like genre is tighter and more strict so that it's more unique, considering games like Hollow Knight can totally be created without the Dark Souls franchise. My point though is that this is for some reason way more subjective than it actually should be. Like for genres, although Souls-like is a subgenre, it still shouldn't be this complicated. No one watched The Conjuring and went on the internet and started arguing on if it was a horror movie or not. I'm pretty sure all of us, after watching it, got the idea of what type of movie it was. Granted, this isn't always true. Like for example, The Truman Show to a lot of people is actually a horror movie, where to me, it's really just a good sci-fi movie. But most of the time, it's not that complicated. So the Hollow Knight actually not being a Souls-like narrative isn't true nor false in my opinion. It's close enough to where it wouldn't be weird for someone to consider it a Souls-like, but also close enough to where it makes sense if you didn't. Genres are obviously not completely subjective though, because we know that Hollow Knight isn't a first-person shooter for example, but it's subjective in that small range. One other important thing to point out is the difference between objectivity and subjectivity, because although video games are an art form, they do technically have objective qualities. How to recognize these is usually somewhat difficult. However, the genre of something is usually pretty straightforward. For example, I could say Dead Space 2 is objectively a third-person shooter, and nothing you say and no argument you can make could change that. However, if I said something like Dead Space 2 is the best first-person shooter ever made, that would be more of a subjective statement. So at the end of the day, it does end up being annoying how the Souls-like genre or subgenre is so loose. This is also the same reason that arguing about if Hollow Knight, or any game for that matter, is a Souls-like is kind of useless, since you probably won't get anywhere. So I really think that the Souls-like genre, even though I love it, isn't really as unique as people think. The fact that you can barely tell if most of the games known as Souls-likes are even Souls-likes is not an issue that a lot of other genres in gaming face. Now, if you guys are smarter than me and would like to correct me on something I got wrong, then honestly go ahead. I'm not sure of anyone else that knows a good answer to if Hollow Knight is a Souls-like or not, but I'm sure a lot of you are out there. But anyways, that's going to be it for today. Thank you for watching and have a good rest of your day.